Have you ever imagined that a human could have a lost past among the stars? And what if that past is whispered back to you by an alien queen with long ears? A photograph may be proof, but the memories you cannot recall could hold secrets powerful enough to reshape the entire galaxy. Elias had never considered himself a graceful man. Even in the calmest moments aboard the Starliner Argonaut Asterisk, he managed to trip over his own feet or accidentally lean into control panels he hadn't meant to touch. So when he was assigned to negotiate with the alien queen of Virlia, a civilization famed across several sectors for their elegance, diplomacy, and deadly political intrigue, he assumed disaster would strike long before he reached her throne. What he had not anticipated was arriving and promptly slipping on a corridor light that glowed like a tiny, smug sun. His arms flailed, and his face met the polished metallic floor with a sound that could only be described as a cross between a drum and an offended walrus. He groaned, attempting to rise in a dignified manner, which involved more wriggling and hissing than any human had a right to produce in a royal audience. That was when he noticed her. She was standing at the far end of the hall, and for a moment Elias wondered if he had finally fallen into some elaborate hallucination induced by space travel. She was tall, impossibly tall, with hair the color of spun silver cascading in long braids, glinting under the ambient lights. Her skin shimmered faintly, the tone of moonlight reflected in still water, and her ears, long, graceful, stretching almost like delicate sails, gave her an unmistakable alien silhouette. Yet in every other sense she resembled a human woman. Her eyes, sharp and bright, tracked his fumbling movements with a mixture of amusement and mild curiosity, the kind that made him feel like both a novice clown and a trespassing diplomat at once. "Human, we've met before," she whispered, her voice smooth and commanding, yet carrying an undertone of mischief. Elias blinked, certain he had misheard. Surely she was making a cosmic joke or testing the limits of human credulity. He coughed, clearing his throat, which only made the awkwardness of the moment more pronounced. "I beg your pardon." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that suggested she knew all the embarrassing things about him before he even did. From beneath the folds of her regal robes, she produced a photograph, held it delicately between two slender fingers that seemed too fragile to touch the universe, yet strong enough to command entire fleets. The edges of the photograph glimmered faintly, iridescent light playing around the image like fireflies dancing in slow motion. Elias squinted, leaning closer, hoping his eyes were malfunctioning. In the photograph, a younger version of himself grinned beside a human-like alien woman with long ears, the same ears now gleaming in the queen's presence. That can't be me," he muttered, and the queen tilted her head, her silver braids swinging slightly, as though they had their own consciousness, laughing silently at his befuddlement. "I assure you it is," she said, her tone formal yet tinged with playful mockery. "You were less graceful then, too." Elia's face heated. I don't remember this." "That is unsurprising," she replied, stepping closer, the light glinting off her robes, giving her the appearance of floating in a halo of silver. "Memory can be selective, human. Sometimes it hides inconvenient truths until the universe deems it safe to reveal them." He opened his mouth to reply, but a sudden misstep sent him sprawling again, his arm knocking into a hovering orb that zipped away like an irate firefly. The queen laughed softly, the sound melodic, carrying an almost musical resonance that made the serious weight of her roles seem lighter somehow. "Careful," she said, though her eyes twinkled with amusement. "You are quite the entertainer, even unintentionally." Elias groaned, dusting himself off, muttering something about gravity fields, corridor lighting, and perhaps the need for a personal anti-clumsiness module. She raised a perfectly arched eyebrow, clearly entertained, and gestured for him to follow her deeper into the palace. The corridors twisted and curved in impossible ways, walls shimmering like liquid metal, lights hovering without visible support, and occasional floating platforms that tilted unpredictably. Every step required careful navigation, or, in Elia's case, spectacularly unsuccessful attempts at it. She guided him through rooms filled with alien flora, glowing softly, their petals pulsating like hearts, while bioluminescent insects floated lazily, occasionally bumping into his helmet with a delicate asterisk pop asterisk. Each new marvel seemed to trigger a new stumble, and each stumble drew a small, amused comment from the Queen. "Perhaps you should take lessons from the corridors themselves," she quipped as he slid along a gravity-shifting floor, finally catching himself on a translucent rail that seemed to appear only for his benefit. At one point, Elias reached for a holographic artifact, a spinning, crystalline sphere that hovered midair, and it vanished the instant his fingers grazed it. He spun in surprise, arms flailing, only to land face first on a soft, bioluminescent rug, and the Queen's laughter echoed down the corridor. "A human's touch is uniquely disruptive," she said, shaking her head with mock exasperation, "yet somehow endearing." Despite the laughter, there were moments of clarity. She spoke of distant moons, storm-lashed planets where they had apparently met before, cryptic references to heroism he could not recall, and fleeting camaraderie that felt strangely familiar. Elias found himself listening, half in disbelief, half in awe, and occasionally laughing at his own absurd predicament, being lectured on diplomacy while simultaneously failing basic physics. Eventually, they arrived at a chamber that seemed part archive, part museum. Holographic displays shimmered along the walls, each artifact a story of her civilization and, unexpectedly, of him. There were photographs, glowing softly like captured starlight, showing scenes he could not remember. A storm-ravaged moon, a perilous cliffside, a fleeting moment of laughter with a young, silver-haired alien woman standing beside him. The images were vivid and undeniably real, yet they tugged at a memory that remained frustratingly out of reach. The Queen watched him closely, her expression both teasing and serious. "You see, human, the universe has a way of hiding inconvenient truths, and yet it ensures that those who belong together find one another." She paused, and a quiet humor flickered in her eyes. "Though clearly, gravity has not been on your side." Elias smiled faintly, brushing off the absurdity of his continued clumsiness. "I'm beginning to think the universe enjoys practical jokes," he muttered, and she laughed again, a sound like silver bells, soft yet resonant, carrying warmth that made the metallic chill of the palace less imposing. As the chapter drew to a close, Elias stood surrounded by alien wonders, photographs glowing faintly, memories he could not fully access, and the Queen herself, whose presence was at once comforting and infuriatingly mysterious. He realized that the photograph was not merely proof of a shared past. It was an invitation, a puzzle, a thread connecting him to someone whose significance he had yet to comprehend. And though the future was uncertain, filled with intrigue, interstellar politics, and personal embarrassment, he could not deny the pull of that thread, nor the humor that had so far lightened the weight of cosmic revelation. The Queen's smile lingered as he finally straightened, the faintest smirk teasing the corners of her lips, and Elias, for the first time in what felt like centuries, wondered if perhaps being a bumbling human in an alien court might be exactly the adventure he had been destined for. Elias followed the Queen through corridors that seemed to bend and twist in impossible ways, the walls shimmering like liquid chrome, reflecting his awkward figure in stretches and distortions that made him appear comically elongated or squat, depending on the angle. Every step required careful attention, though his natural talent for disaster rendered it nearly impossible. He stumbled over subtle shifts in gravity, nearly collided with a hovering holographic display of a Virelian nebula, and even managed to brush against a floating sphere that emitted a quiet, indignant squeak before zipping off into the ceiling. The Queen walked beside him with effortless grace, silver braids swinging slightly as if they had their own sense of timing, glancing at his missteps with a soft, amused smile. "Careful, human," she said lightly. "These corridors are more forgiving than you think, but I cannot say the same for your dignity." Elias groaned, muttering something about dignity being overrated in zero gravity, and the Queen laughed softly, the sound like wind chimes stirred by a playful breeze. "You may not remember me, but I do find your clumsiness endearing," she added, and he could not decide whether he should feel insulted or honored. As they progressed, the corridors opened into chambers filled with floating gardens. Plants glowed faintly in colors he had no names for, petals rippling as if breathing, and small bioluminescent insects flitted lazily through the air. Elias tried to reach for one, assuming it might be friendly, only to have it vanish in a puff of sparkles that left him blinking in confusion. "Friendly, yes," the Queen said, "but not yours to touch, unless you enjoy being mildly electrocuted." Elias yelped, brushing imaginary sparks from his sleeve, earning a soft chuckle from her that reminded him how easily humor could dissolve tension, even cosmic tension. They reached a chamber dominated by floating holographic artifacts, each spinning gently, each holding a fragment of Virelia's history. Elias, drawn by curiosity, extended a hand to a spherical object that hovered lazily in the air. It reacted instantly, flaring with colors before disappearing completely, leaving behind a faint echo of laughter in the form of light. Elias stepped back, flailing, and caught himself on a nearby rail that seemed to have appeared solely for his benefit. "It seems the universe conspires against you," the Queen said, shaking her head. "Or perhaps it simply enjoys a good show." Elias couldn't help but smile despite himself. There was a rhythm to her words, a cadence that made her teasing feel like part of the natural order of things. "I think it's just me," he admitted. "I am a disaster walking, talking, and apparently touching too." The Queen laughed again, and it was melodic, warming the air around them. "Perhaps," she said, "but a memorable disaster is far more interesting than a competent one." As they moved deeper into the palace, she began to reveal fragments of the past he could not recall. She spoke of storm-swept moons, perilous cliffside negotiations, fleeting acts of heroism, and moments of levity shared between them. Elias listened, alternately fascinated and flustered, trying to piece together memories that felt tantalizingly close, yet frustratingly inaccessible. Each story was punctuated by her playful comments, teasing him about his earlier mistakes, his tendency to trip over his own feet, and his apparent inability to understand even the most basic Virelian etiquette. At one point, he tried to speak, but stumbled over his words as he attempted to navigate a low-hanging holographic projection. The Queen reached out, gently guiding him away from the projection, and quipped, "Perhaps diplomacy is best conducted on solid ground." Elias laughed, a little embarrassed, a little relieved, and began to appreciate the strange balance of her presence, commanding yet playful, alien yet almost familiar. They arrived at a chamber that contained not just artifacts but personal items, memories, if one could call them that, stored in glowing crystalline forms. Elias' curiosity was nearly unbearable. He reached for one, hesitant, and the Queen allowed him, warning only, "Careful. These contain moments you may find surprising." The crystal responded instantly, projecting a scene of a younger Elias navigating a treacherous cliffside, a Virelian woman with long silver hair beside him, bracing against the wind, laughing despite the danger. Elias' mouth fell open. I don't remember this at all," he said. "You were younger then," she replied softly, her voice carrying a warmth that contrasted with the cold metallic gleam of the palace. "Memories can be tricky. Some hide themselves until the universe deems you ready." Elias could only stare, his mind spinning as he tried to reconcile the evidence before him with the gaps in his recollection. He felt both awe and frustration, the former for the wonder he was witnessing, the latter for his own absent memory. The Queen moved closer, her silver braids brushing his shoulder lightly, a gesture that was both reassuring and slightly intimidating. "Do not despair," she said. "You are here now, and that matters more than what has been forgotten. Besides, it gives you the pleasure of rediscovering it, no?" Elias could not help but grin, despite the gravity of the situation. "I suppose rediscovery has its merits," he admitted, though his clumsiness immediately led him to bump against another hovering artifact, which responded with a small, colorful explosion of light. She laughed, a sound that eased some of his tension, and quipped, "And sometimes rediscovery comes with minor inconveniences." Elias rubbed his forehead, muttering about being a hazard in both time and space, and the Queen shook her head, her amusement evident. "You have a talent for chaos," she said. I dare say it will serve you well, if not in diplomacy, then at least in keeping life interesting." As they continued through the palace, the queen shared more glimpses of the past. Faint holographic echoes of them working together on distant moons, navigating alien storms, and performing acts that demanded courage and ingenuity he could not recall. Despite his confusion, he found himself laughing at her comments, the gentle ribbing that accompanied each revelation. She pointed out how he had nearly slipped off a cliff during one mission, how he had attempted to communicate with a Virelian creature using interpretive dance, and how his solution to a delicate political negotiation had involved juggling glowing orbs, none of which he remembered. Elias groaned, laughing despite himself. "I swear the universe has a personal vendetta against me," he muttered. The queen tilted her head, her long ears catching the light, and replied, "No, human. The universe merely ensures that your story is never dull." By the time they reached a balcony overlooking a city that glimmered with bioluminescent lights, the combination of humor, wonder, and slowly unraveling history had begun to settle into him. He realized that the photographs, the memories, and the teasing were not just about revelation. They were a bridge. A bridge between past and present, between human and alien, between him and the queen whose presence was at once baffling, compelling, and undeniably magnetic. Elias let out a long breath, watching the floating light patterns of the city below, realizing that whatever had been lost to memory could still be rediscovered. And perhaps, in the company of this alien queen, his clumsy human self might finally rise to meet the vast, intricate dance of the universe, even if it involved tripping over his own 2 feet every so often. The queen's gaze lingered on him, her smile both knowing and playful, as if to say that the true adventure was only beginning, and that humor, mistakes, and missteps were as much a part of it as courage and memory. Elias stood on the balcony, the hum of the bioluminescent city below vibrating softly through the platform. The glow from the hovering lights painted shifting patterns across his uniform, a kaleidoscope of colors that seemed to wink at him in ironic amusement. He rubbed the back of his neck, realizing that in the course of the past days, hours that had stretched into something resembling weeks in the palace's peculiar time fields, he had stumbled more, laughed more, and perhaps remembered more than he had in years. His clumsy human self, once a source of embarrassment, had become a surprisingly effective instrument of discovery, a bridge across species, memory, and galactic politics. The queen approached, her silver hair catching the light like strands of starlight spun into silk. Her long ears tilted slightly forward in a gesture Elias had learned, through trial and countless mishaps, was a sign of curiosity mixed with amusement. "You seem contemplative," she said, her tone teasing but warm. "Or perhaps you are wondering if the universe is done laughing at you yet." "I was wondering," Elias admitted, glancing at the horizon where floating vehicles glided between towering crystal spires, "if the universe has a better sense of humor than I do." He laughed, the sound unsteady but genuine, and the queen's lips curved into a small smile. "Perhaps," she said, "but humor is often the key to understanding. Even humans, it seems, require a little chaos to make sense of the cosmos." Elias chuckled. She was right. If he had learned anything, it was that missteps, accidents, and laughter were often more revealing than careful planning. The photographs, the memories, and the strange corridors of the palace were all part of a larger design, one that had led him here. Standing beside a queen who had once been a stranger, now a companion, a guide, and something more elusive, yet profoundly significant. "About the photograph," he said, pointing vaguely at the holographic image that still hovered in a protective field in the chamber behind them. I think I understand now." The queen arched a delicate eyebrow, her expression inviting elaboration. "It's not just proof of a past encounter, is it? It's proof that we can trust what we cannot fully remember. That the choices we made, the risks we took, they led us here." Her gaze softened, and she reached out to brush a stray strand of silver hair from his forehead, a light touch that conveyed both intimacy and reassurance. "Precisely," she said. "And you, human, have learned to navigate more than just gravity fields and palace corridors. You have learned to navigate uncertainty, with grace, laughter, and surprisingly good instincts. Elias swallowed, realizing that her praise, though lightly veiled in humor, carried the weight of truth. He thought back to the moments of rediscovery, each memory he had relived or been shown, standing on storm-lashed moons, negotiating with alien species, surviving dangers he had no recollection of, and he understood how far he had come. The chaos that had once defined him now seemed like preparation, a necessary rehearsal for the challenge of understanding both the alien world and the mysteries of his own past. And somehow, humor had been his guide, easing tension, opening doors, and allowing him to connect in ways he could never have anticipated. The Queen's voice broke through his reverie. "There is one final step," she said. "If you truly wish to understand, you must see the archives. Not as a visitor, not as a diplomat, but as someone who was involved." She led him through a corridor that shimmered with undulating light, walls rippling like liquid metal. Every turn revealed new wonders. Floating gardens with plants that emitted faint melodic hums, bioluminescent insects forming ephemeral constellations in the air, and artifacts that responded to his touch with subtle pulses of energy. Elias tried not to trip, though the occasional stumble drew a soft laugh from the Queen. "Your talents are consistent," she said, "but charmingly so." In the heart of the palace, they entered the archives. Holographic projections of past events shimmered in three-dimensional space, scenes replaying with startling clarity. Elias watched as a younger version of himself interacted with the Queen across planets and moons, navigating crises with a mix of courage and improvisation. Each moment was tinged with laughter, danger, and trust. He realized that his previous forgetfulness had been no accident. The memories had been held back, waiting for him to be ready, waiting for him to appreciate the connection that transcended species, time, and circumstance. The Queen stood beside him, her presence a steadying force. "Do you understand now?" she asked. "Why you were here, why these moments were preserved?" "I think I do," Elias said, voice quiet but firm. "It's not about remembering everything. It's about understanding what matters. The choices, the trust, the moments that define us, even if we forget them." He smiled, realizing he felt a sense of completion, a subtle shift from confusion to clarity. "And the humor," he added with a grin, "the universe clearly insists we never forget the humor." The Queen laughed softly, the sound echoing among the projections. "Indeed. Chaos and humor, human, are essential ingredients in understanding the cosmos and yourself." She gestured toward a final projection, a recording of a mission they had undertaken together on a moon swept by violent storms. In the footage, Elias saw himself navigating treacherous cliffs, slipping frequently, but always rising, guided by the Queen's presence. He could see now that his clumsiness had not been weakness. It had been a test of adaptability, a way to teach resilience in unexpected forms. As the projection faded, the Queen took his hand, a gesture of connection that carried more weight than words. "Your journey does not end here," she said. "But now you are equipped to face what comes next, with courage, wit, and an understanding of the past that is stronger than memory alone." Elias nodded, feeling a profound sense of growth. He realized that his perception of himself had changed. The bumbling human had become someone capable of navigating complexity, embracing uncertainty, and connecting across worlds. Humor had been his compass, mistakes had been his lessons, and the bonds he shared with the Queen were now a foundation upon which trust and destiny could be built. As they returned to the balcony, overlooking the city that shimmered like a living constellation, Elias felt a quiet satisfaction. The mysteries of the photograph, the lost memories, and the shared past had been reconciled, not through force or intellect alone, but through patience, laughter, and the willingness to embrace chaos. The Queen's gaze met his, a subtle smile acknowledging both their journey and the unspoken understanding between them. "Ready to face the future?" she asked, her voice carrying both challenge and invitation. Elias took a deep breath, the air scented faintly with alien flora, the hum of the city beneath them, and the pulse of the stars beyond. "I think I am," he said. "And if I stumble along the way, at least I'll have good company and plenty of laughs." The Queen tilted her head, her ears catching the light in a way that seemed to reflect amusement and approval. Then let us proceed, human, together. As they stood side by side, the horizon before them filled with floating spires, shimmering vehicles, and distant celestial storms, Elias understood that he had changed, not only in skill or knowledge, but in perspective. He had learned that memory was not the only measure of experience. As they stood side by side, the horizon before them filled with floating spires, shimmering vehicles, and distant celestial storms, Elias understood that he had changed, not only in skill or knowledge, but in perspective. He had learned that memory was not the only measure of experience, that laughter could be a bridge between worlds, and that connections, once formed, could transcend time, species, and circumstance. The city's bioluminescence pulsed gently, as if in harmony with the rhythm of his newfound confidence. Elias, the once clumsy, unsure human, now stood ready to embrace the cosmos in partnership with the queen who had once whispered, "Human, we've met before." He no longer doubted it. He felt it in his bones, in the cadence of his heartbeat, and in the light reflected in her silver eyes. They had indeed met before, and the journey ahead was theirs to share, full of wonder, humor, and discovery. The balcony shimmered in the alien night, the wind carrying the faint hum of distant engines and laughter. Elias took a deep breath, feeling the fullness of the moment, and for the first time he laughed, not at himself, not at missteps, not at absurdity, but with the quiet, contented joy of someone who had found his place in an unexpected universe. The queen's laughter joined his, harmonizing with the hum of the city, and together they stepped forward into the night, into a future that promised challenges, mysteries, and moments of